Okay, so we are live. Sorry about, once again, I'm having plenty of trouble with sharing these sort of things properly. Okay, we've just heard the from HN19. Today's hearing has included two sessions, one of which started off, we heard from Frank Bennett, who was the brother of Michael Hartley, whose identity was stolen by HN12. I'm joined with Eveline Lubbers, who you can see on screen, and also Jessica.
Morning, or afternoon.
She's got a restriction order, so you can't see her, but I'm sure she's here. Just quickly, firstly on Frank Bennett this morning, it was an incredibly moving, emotional statement, witness statement from him. Incredibly powerful.
It was hard to listen to. I think certainly I was quite emotional listening to him and that. But amazingly well done, Frank. We texted him afterwards. I'm just like, let's send him love and solidarity from everyone and that. But yeah, just how awful. It really sort of like gives you an idea of just what absolutely shit people these filth are. But yeah, it's just disgusting, and it's particularly hard to sit there and listen to. With the fact that Shitface, or Andy Coles, as other people know him, was the one that wrote that in the Tradecraft manual about how to use the identity of dead children, and just how funny he seems to find it. The amusing little sort of asides that he puts in there. The whole thing is it's so distasteful and disgusting, and they should be, it's nothing but shame. They should feel nothing but shame for what they've done, and to families like Frank's, they're just a disgrace, an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, it's truly awful. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a more tender, gentle man than Frank Bennett. His family were exemplary, church-going. Law-abiding, genuinely incredibly good people. His brother sounded like an exemplary character. I mean, I've got to be fair. As an anti-militarist vegan, a soldier who was working on a fishing trawler isn't necessarily somebody I'll be feeling sympathy for. But I sobbed uncontrollably during his witness, his live evidence. It was incredibly moving. If you didn't see it this morning, I really recommend going through and watching it back, just to really understand the human impact that so many of the things these undercover officers did, what the impact they had.
Well, specifically this one, because often they would take the identity of children that died really young. But Michael died when he was 18. It was his dream to join in the military, the army, and he worked as an apprentice, I think, on a fish trawler, and he was thrown overboard, and his body was just never found. So he's not even officially dead; he's presumed dead. So that stayed with that family for all the time. Frank explained how the dynamics of the family changed. With the hole that he left, and he even brought some pictures of his brother, what he looked like when he was young, and also a letter he wrote to his mum, basically how homesick he was. It was really touching. So that sits with that family. His mother, never really came over it, sort of got over it. And then years and years later, the inquiry comes to his mum to talk about something to do with her eldest, and she's like the shock of that. Of maybe they found something, maybe no, he's not alive, but you never know. And then to find out what had been done with his name and all the incredible things that the real boy would never have done. It's kind of like Frank said, tainting their memories, and they can never think of him again without the undercover cop looking over the real boy's shoulder. It's like he's so very well formulated and put. It was really, really impressive.
I mean, I think as well as however, as disturbing as the things that Michael Hartley would never have done, some of the most disturbing parts was the way in which HN12 behaved in the ways that Mark Hartley would have behaved. So he claimed to have a sick mother that he visited regularly, which was what the real Michael Hartley was actually like. And it once again underlines this thing about, like, they weren't just stealing names, they were stealing whole identities. It was deeply disturbing. After that, we heard from HN19. Yeah, HN19. Sorry, there's so many HN numbers I get easily confused. Who used the cover name Malcolm Shearing, who again was someone who died as a child, though again a bit later in life than a baby, like some of them had. He was someone who infiltrated the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. That we heard from Michael Chant yesterday, who was General Secretary of that party. He's here today in the public gallery listening to the evidence from a man who he thought was a member of the party and knew when he was deployed. It's been quite interesting. Obviously, we heard a lot about Rick Gibson in the first tranche. This was a friend of this officer, HN19's, someone who was exposed because the activist he was infiltrating, which was Big Flame, found the death certificate of the child whose identity he stole. We heard from HN19 about how he chose a slightly different, he made sure that it was an older, so it was harder to find the death certificate. But he claims that he had no knowledge of what Rick Gibson was doing. He was very clear that he had no knowledge of anything to do with deceptive sexual abuse by any of the undercover officers.
4 women he had relationships with, and he was asked, did you hear anything about his reputation? He had the name of being a bit of a dog.
A womanizer.
It wasn't womanizer, it was a different word.
A ladies' man was
a
the
ladies'
phrase,
man,
phrase
yeah.
used, yeah.
So, well, he sort of brushed that off and said, yeah, well, he talked the talk, but he wanted to make an impression, and it's not really like, well, and he was my friend, so I really don't know about it, which is sort of contradicting in and of itself.
Yeah, very much. I mean, he was quite candid about the fact that a big motivation for him was the higher rate of pay than you would get as a normal special branch officer, and also the huge levels of overtime that he got for being in an undercover deployment. He even said that, went as far as to say that when there was talk of him being withdrawn early from the group, because it became very clear that there was no real intelligence to be gathered from this group, he resisted that and made sure that he stayed undercover for his full term. Because of the financial incentive that actually gave him. And also he claimed to not have known what the SDS was before he was asked, but when he was asked, he thought it like, I think he even used it was an ace job, and it was like very sort of prestigious, and he was dazzled by it. So, like, from not knowing anything until you're asked, to go to like being dazzled and prestigious, I'm really unhappy or disappointed by the follow-up questions today, because there is a clear discrepancy there. It was the same with that he said that he had been to the city where his cover name boy came from, Norwich, and had found out that he had been in a sort of open air school because he was fresh air school because he had been a sick boy. And I'm thinking that is not something you find out by going to Norwich and go to the public library. This was before the internet. You don't do like 10 years of newspapers, just paging through them. This is it tells me that they apparently had access to medical files, or that they knew much more about the identity or the personality of the children. And again, there was no follow-up question for it's really it's disappointing. Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of talk about the merits of infiltrating the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist. He talked about how he initially went to meetings of the Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist, who were a Maoist group, but he didn't infiltrate them because it was decided they had a purely political program and they weren't involved in any kind of public disorder. So we're in the hallway, so there's a lot of noise. This is the problem this time around with the inquiry. Hasn't given us a room for co-participants to use, so there is a lot of noise. He didn't infiltrate that group, but he did infiltrate the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninists, because he felt that there was a history of violence there, which dated back to long before his deployment. There was some discussion about how perhaps the special branch files were not suitable really for deciding who should be infiltrated and who shouldn't. He talked about how their potential for violence diminished during his deployment, but it became very clear that it was never there. Once he was deployed, there was none of it. We heard yesterday about petrol bombs. Turned out that was an anecdote from an elderly member of the party who told him it's not clear if those petrol bombs referred to a recently early period, or this was a man who volunteered in the Spanish Civil War as a Republican. So how long ago this petrol bomb story related to? It could have been. It could have been the 1950s. Do you know what I mean? There's no real sort of anything else of interest about HN19 so far? Well, there's more to come. He'll be back again this afternoon.
Yeah, there's more to come. At first, he tried to keep his cover name restricted, even because he was afraid that it would interfere with his privacy and that his real identity would be found out through his cover name. He's what can we say? He's quite confident, but in a different way than Piers was the day before yesterday. He's like
he's quite repulsive, to be honest. He at one point they said he made some disparaging comments about women within the groups, and he actually said, well, I could make worse comments about the women. Or something along those lines, as if he'd done those women a favour by not being so awful about them. But he's quite repulsive, and I just as attitudes go, I think his stinks. At least some people seem to have seem to feel ashamed, but this guy that I don't get that from him at all.
No, definitely not. I think one of the most telling parts for me was when he was talking about how he really felt completely out of his depth in the Revolutionary Communist Party of Britain, Marxist-Leninist, that he didn't. He was out of his depth both politically and musically. He couldn't understand the conversations that were taking place amongst core members of the party. He said he didn't consider himself stupid, but which I thought, the butt did all that heavy lifting there. There was a number of times he had to have questions restructured for him because he didn't understand. He claimed there was a double negative at one point in one of the questions. There wasn't. He's clearly a bit of an old-fashioned copper, but I mean that as an insult. He's not
he came across as military or maybe MI5 to me, and
I don't think he was that bright.
That's true. Then military maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah.
Anything else to add about today? I'm quite keen to go and get some lunch now. We haven't got much break left before we're back in again. I'll do another debrief at the end of this session. That'll be the end of the week. I'll try and put something together over the weekend, possibly a new podcast episode. Fancy doing one of them?
Oh, maybe.
You never know.
You should.
Marvellous.
Yeah.